Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're getting into that really subtle feeling, the one where everything seems okay, looks fine on the outside, but deep down something just feels off.
Yeah.
Our starting point is this really insightful article I co-authored with Candice Cook. Now, Candice is a trauma-informed herbalist, an intuitive healer. Her work is amazing, really sits at that intersection of body, mind, soul.
Right. The focus, in my work and in the piece is often on helping people, especially women, find those emotional roots of pain, get back their own power.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive, to try and understand what this kind of vague discomfort might actually be telling us, and maybe look at well-being through a slightly different lens.
What was really fascinating and something we explore in the article is that this feeling, this offness, it's not necessarily a sign you missed a diagnosis or something. It's more like your body's own intelligence.
It's intuition.
Yeah, exactly. It's like an inner knowing trying to get a message through that your conscious mind hasn't quite picked up on yet.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Like a little background hum saying, pay attention, even if you don't know why yet. The
Mhm.
article mentions this could be linked to like unconscious denial.
It could be, yeah. Sometimes things feel too overwhelming, maybe too painful to look at directly, or life's just so busy, right? We kind of accidentally tune out our own needs.
Just push through.
hmm And so when someone actually voices that feeling, something's just not right, it's often quite profound. It says a lot about their relationship with themselves.
How so?
Well, it can be a subtle clue, maybe pointing towards past stuff, perhaps even trauma, that's created a bit of a gap, a disconnect from who they really are, leading to that, background unease.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into something else from the article, this idea of waking up from conditioning. What does that actually mean here?
Right. So that feeling of wrongness, that little dissonance, it can actually be the very first nudge, the start of realizing, hang on, I don't actually need permission from anyone else to be, well, me,
Hmm.
to live my own truth.
That feels like a big shift from, say, more conventional ways of looking at problems.
It can be, yeah. Because sometimes those conventional approaches, while totally necessary in many cases, can sometimes, maybe unintentionally, keep us circling the same patterns instead of diving deeper. It's like we often get offered comfort, maybe, when what we really need is truth. That discomfort is like your inner compass trying to point you towards that truth.
The article uses a pretty strong phrase, a sedative cocktail,
Yeah.
talking about like conventional medicine, entertainment, maybe social pressures all combined.
Yeah, it's a striking way to put it. The idea is that sometimes these things put together can sort of dull our awareness a bit, keep us from asking the really big, maybe uncomfortable questions about our lives.
So that little feeling of offness is like a crack in that.
Exactly. It's like a little signal flare from your soul, kind of whispering, hey, there's actually more available to you than this.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think, the integration piece. The article really stresses understanding physical stuff, physiological issues, in the context of where they might come from psychologically or behaviorally. Can you give us an example of how that works?
Sure. Okay, so think about someone struggling with, say, high insulin levels, maybe leading to weight gain they can't shift. A purely conventional approach might just focus on diet, medication, managing the insulin itself.
Right, treat the number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But an integrated approach, like we discussed in the article, asks why. Why is the insulin high? Maybe there's underlying chronic stress driving up cortisol.
Okay.
And maybe that stress isn't just from today's pressures, but actually stems from, say, unresolved stuff from childhood that now plays out in patterns like emotional eating. You
Yeah.
see, the physical symptom is tangled up with a whole emotional history.
So it's not just treating the symptom in isolation, but seeing the whole web, the
Yeah,
connections.
precisely. The article really highlights how important it is to acknowledge that stuff, the trauma, the stress, and bring in healing processes for that, alongside maybe the dietary changes or whatever else.
What kind of healing processes?
Well, it could involve things like using specific herbs to help the nervous system calm down, to shift out of that constant fight or flight, or maybe nature-based therapy, getting outdoors to reconnect, to help release some of that stored tension and trauma. It just gives a much fuller picture, a more complete path to well-being than only looking at the physiology.
And the article mentions using questions to kind of uncover these deeper links, simple questions.
Yeah, sometimes the simplest questions are the most powerful. Things like, when else in your life have you felt this way? Or where do you feel this in your body? Questions like that can gently unlock things. Memories, patterns, feelings that have been running the show unconsciously for ages.
Does it always take a long time to see the connections?
Sometimes it unfolds gradually. But other times, honestly, the right question at the right moment. It can be like flipping a switch, a sudden insight.
The article also talks about being direct sometimes, pointing out potential underlying issues after some exploring. Why is that helpful? Isn't that confronting?
Well, it has to be done compassionately, of course. But after gently exploring for a while, sometimes a direct observation about a potential root cause can actually feel really validating, even liberating, especially for someone who might have spent years kind of minimizing or avoiding their own truth.
Like cutting through the noise.
Kind of, yeah. It can gently help them acknowledge what might really be contributing to that initial feeling of something's not right.
Okay, another term the article brings up is shadow work. Can you unpack that a bit for us? What does that involve?
Sure. Shadow work, basically, as we talk about in the article, is about looking at our automatic reactions, those knee-jerk responses we have in everyday life.
Like getting instantly furious in traffic?
Exactly. Or maybe holding on to grudges really tightly. Shadow work is about asking, okay, where does this actually come from?
Hmm.
And trying to understand how that reaction, even if it's unhelpful now, might have once served a purpose. Like maybe it felt protective at some point.
So that anger in traffic might not just be about the traffic jam itself.
It might be tapping into something deeper. Yeah. Maybe a learned feeling of powerlessness from way back. The point is to understand the why behind the reaction.
Even if the reaction isn't working for you anymore.
Right. The article points out that our psyche, its main job is to keep us safe. It develops strategies for that. But sometimes those strategies become outdated or even harmful over time. Shadow work is about seeing those patterns clearly, appreciating why they arose, and then consciously choosing different ways to respond.
That makes sense. The article also mentions a ripple effect and this idea of reconnecting with wildness. What's that about?
Yeah, it's a really lovely point in the article, this observation that often when people do this kind of deep inner work, they naturally feel called to help others heal too. It sort of ripples outwards.
And the wildness, is that about like going off grid?
Not necessarily. As it's described in the article, wildness isn't about rejecting society or being irresponsible. It's more about reclaiming our innate connection. Connection to nature, yes, but also to our own authentic selves. Living from a place of inner truth rather than just following external rules or expectations.
So shedding the conditioning we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It's about getting back in touch with our truest, most alive selves, that authentic nature.
Which leads to another point the article makes, that just being human can be hard work. Why frame it like that?
Well, the article suggests that a lot of the struggle comes because modern life often conditions us away from that natural state, away from that connection and authenticity, that wildness. We're often taught, ignore your body's signals, push through fatigue, prioritize productivity over just being present, feeling what you feel.
Right. Keep busy.
And so that initial vague feeling, the something's not right sense, the article frames it as maybe the very first step back, the first whisper calling you to remember what it means to be fully human. It's a call towards wholeness.
So healing isn't just fixing problems.
It's more about remembering, reclaiming that wholeness that's already there underneath the layers, and that uncertainty people feel sometimes when they say, I don't even know what's wrong. That's not weakness. The article sees it as courage, actually, wisdom. It's what opens the door to real change.
And bringing it back to you, Candice, as the co-author, tell us a bit more about your specific work in this area. What do you focus on?
Well, as the article touches on, my real passion is helping people, often women, transform those challenging experiences, illness, feeling emotionally dysregulated, carrying what I call emotional weight, turning those struggles into sources of deeper personal power.
How do you do that? What does your approach look like?
It's really a blend. I use nature-based therapies, herbal wisdom, sometimes astrology, and deep soul work. It's about guiding people into those less obvious spaces, the unseen places within themselves where the real healing often starts.
Can you give an example?
Sure. It might involve, say, tracing the generational patterns behind binge eating, or uncovering a hidden fear of being truly seen that's actually fueling harsh self-criticism. My sessions often weave together things like looking at blood work with these kinds of personal breakthroughs.
So connecting the tangible and intangible.
Exactly. For me, this isn't just a job. It's really core to who I am, helping people move out of that state of confusion or just coping and into a place of clarity, feeling really alive.
So wrapping up, the big takeaway seems to be that feeling, that nagging sense that something's not quite right, even if you can't name it. It's really important.
Absolutely. It's not something to just ignore or push down. It's actually potentially a really powerful signal. an invitation maybe to explore things more deeply, to start a journey towards more authenticity, more wholeness, real healing.
That definitely gives us all something to think about. Maybe ask yourself, what subtle wrongness might you be noticing in your own life? And what could it be trying to tell you about your own path? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.